Hey, what's going on, guys? Rum Gaming here, back into the video. Today's episode, we're taking a look at the Holy Paladin for Mythic Plus Season 1, Patch 1105. So this guide's going to go over Herald of the Sun specifically. We're not going to be covering Lightsmith. Now, I do want to make a little disclaimer here, is that Lightsmith and Herald of the Sun are both viable for pretty much all content right now. Herald of the Sun did get some nerfs this patch, and then Lightsmith did get some buffs. So you could play either or right now. So that's why I'm going to do two separate guides. This one's going to be over Herald of the Sun, and then we're going to do a separate Lightsmith guide later. So some of the main things that have been, let's just start with talents that have been removed. So our seals have both been removed. We have Seal of Order and Seal of Alacrity. So the big one of those two, I think, is probably Seal of Alacrity, because we're not getting that 4% haste anymore. So that actually does affect our rotation. And basically what this means is we're not going to be able to generate holy power quite as quickly as we've been able to in the past. So that's kind of a con. Now, those two are not being completely removed. Some of the effects have been made baseline between the two seals, but just note that there are some things that are being kept from the two seals, and there are some things that are not. Another talent that was removed, and this is one that I do like, is Strength of Conviction was removed, and that's the talent that kind of buffed us up, buffed our Shield of Righteousness and Word of Glory, healing and damage if we were standing within our consecration. So we did get some talent points freed up by the removal of these talents. Now, most of the changes that we saw was actually on the class tree rather than the specialization tree. So let's talk about some of those. So the first one's going to be Selfless Healer here. So Flash of Light and Holy Light are 10% more effective on your allies, and 10% of the healing done also heals you. So this is not the strongest talent. I think that this probably needs to be buffed by an additional 10 to 20% to see any sort of play with it. We have seen this in a lot of the different healers recently. We just saw it with Restoration Druid, where they're kind of giving us talents to where a single target heals or healing multiple targets at once. And it looks like this is just something that they're kind of trying out with Holy Paladin, but I don't think many people are going to be taking it just due to how weak it is. We have Lightbearer down here at the very bottom of our class tree. 10% of all healing done to you from other sources heals up to 4 nearby allies, divided evenly among them. So since nobody's going to be healing us in a Mythic Plus environment, this isn't something we'll be taking. This is more of a raid talent. Another interesting talent here is Lead the Charge. So Divine Steed reduces the cooldown of 4 nearby allies' major movement abilities by 3 seconds, and then your movement speed is increased by 3%. We also have a new talent here called Imperial Ward. So Lay on Hands grants the target 30% increased armor for 8 seconds, and now ignores healing reduction effects. I've also heard that you can use this on certain warriors due to the Armor to the Teeth talent that they had. This can be like a mini power infusion for them, because all that armor is then converted into damage. But that is kind of sketchy, because normally we're using our Lay on Hands for emergency healing, not as a power infusion. So that would be a very high risk, high reward comp specific playstyle. Overall though, I don't think that many of these talent changes are going to impact Holy Paladin too much, especially in terms of our core rotation. I think one of the main issues Holy Paladin still has that Blizzard has not addressed is our spot healing still isn't super good. And it just seems to me that Blizzard hasn't really made up their mind with Holy Paladin. You know, what role are they wanting Holy Paladin to fill? So this is one of the reasons I decided not to main Holy Paladin this season. This might be wild to say, but believe it or not, I just don't really trust Blizzard in some of their balancing and design decisions. So I just didn't want my main this season to be locked behind Blizzard's crazy class design and balancing decisions that they make. So anyways, that's my rant on that. That's pretty much it in terms of changes. There is a lot that changed with the Lightsmith tree that will be in our next guide. So the first spell that we're going to be focused on is Holy Shock. It's going to be at the top of our specialization tree. So on an 8-second cooldown, we get 2 charges of it, and that's going to be due to Light's Conviction here. So you're going to make sure you're picking up that talent, and this will generate a Holy Power. This is going to be one of our main Holy Power generators, and that's kind of how Holy Paladin works, is you spend these spells, you build up your Holy Power, and then you spend that Holy Power on more powerful healing spells. So if we look down here, I got this little bar. It's a Holy Power bar. As I start casting these Holy Shocks on myself, the bar builds up, and then let me gain one more so that I can spend it. And then now I can spend those 3 Holy Power on my Eternal Flame here for a whole bunch of healing. So if you go into your spellbook here and just type in Holy Shock at the bottom, you'll see all these different magnifying glasses that pop up, spells and our talents that buff our Holy Shock spell. Most of it is just flat stat buffs to Holy Shock, so don't worry about too much of it. There's one that you do need to be aware of is Imbued Infusions. So consuming Infusion of Light reduces the cooldown of Holy Shock by 1 second. So Infusion of Light is this buff that we get, and you can spend it on a couple spells, and they all have this different effect. But whenever we consume that Infusion of Light, we get 1 second of cooldown on our Holy Shock. So if you're not sure with what Infusion of Light here, this is going to be one of our passives. So to read it out, your critical Holy Shocks empower your next spell cast. So Flash of Light, Holy Light, and a Judgment. So this is one of the reasons it's very important to cast Holy Shock in our rotation, is because we want to be able to proc this Infusion of Light. So just to show you guys, when it does proc, you will get these sort of 2 little glowing bars on the side of your character. You can see I got 2 stacks of it up here in the top right. And then I can consume those with a Judgment, or I can consume one with a Flash of Light or Holy Light. So what I normally do is, it depends on what kind of healing you need. If you need emergency healing, I typically spend these charges on my Holy Light. There's not too many situations where I'm casting Flash of Light, so I typically don't use it on Flash of Light, even with the reduced mana cost. So I'm normally picking Holy Light or Judgment. Flash of Light right now in its current iteration just doesn't feel super good to press. It has a cast time. It doesn't do that much healing. Even with the mana cost reduction, I just don't think it's really hardly ever worth to press. It is okay to press in terms of like generating a holy power. However, in most cases, you'd just be casting like a Crusader Strike or something, or a Holy Shock to get that holy power. So for the most part, just focusing here on Holy Light and Judgment. So let's talk about what Judgment is. Judgment judges the target, dealing X amount of holy damage and preventing 110,000 damage dealt by the target. So this isn't like a direct heal, but it does prevent damage, and this will be a pretty core part of how Holy Paladin plays, is you'll want to be casting Judgment a lot to prevent a whole bunch of damage from going out, and it also generates a holy power. So a very good button to press. Now we do have a talent called Greater Judgment. This is going to come from our class tree, and this is the talent that actually makes that damage be prevented from the enemy. So just make sure you are picking up this talent. And then we can also beef this up a little bit through Inflorescence of the Sunwell. So you can kind of see on the second line, increases Greater Judgment's effect by an additional 50%. So we talked about Judgment, we talked about Flash of Light. Let's go ahead and talk about Holy Light now. So this is going to be probably your main single target heal, and it's a powerful, but it's an expensive spell to use. So you don't be using it a whole bunch, but you can use it to kind of spot heal the tank and a few targets that, you know, you want to take from 20% to 100% for whatever reason. It could be a targeted spell on them, you know, whatever. So this is a button I'm pressing quite often, and it's one of the 2 main single target heals that I use. I guess one of the 3 actually, if you count Eternal Flame, but we'll get to that when we do. Now, the reason that this is a strong single target spell is because of 2 talents. So, or I guess 1 talent and 1 passive. So Infusion of Light, if we look at Holy Light, the healing is increased by 150%. So if you remember those yellow bars that popped up, when those yellow bars pop up next to our character, this spell is beefed up by 150%. And then not only that, through Inflorescence of the Sunwell, we look at the very last 2 lines here, last 3 lines, and Holy Light's healing is increased by an additional 50%. So we're pretty much getting double the potency of this spell just through a couple of talent. Now, not only that, through our Divine Revelations here, Holy Light and Judgment will refund 0.5% of our maximum mana. So that's something I did forget to talk about on Judgment, is through Divine Revelations, we will get some mana back. And then also through our Holy Light, we will get a little bit of mana back as well. So this talent makes it not so expensive to press. Don't get me wrong though, it is still pretty expensive even with this talent, so don't be spamming it too much. Then we do have some other synergies with other talents here, but just to kind of keep things simple for now, let's just go ahead and go to probably our main Holy Power spender. So we have a couple of them. Just go into our spellbook here. So we have Light of Dawn, and then we also have Eternal Flame. So if you're not running Herald of the Sun, you will not have Eternal Flame here. So if you're like a lower level and you're watching this, you will actually have Word of Glory. So Eternal Flame replaces the Word of Glory spell. So this is just like a beefed up Word of Glory. Essentially, it puts a hot effect on the target, and this will also be increased by 25% when cast on yourself. So this spell is your main Holy Power spender. This is really all that I'm spending my Holy Power on for the most part. Sometimes if there's nothing else to press, I'll put it into like Shield of the Righteous, but for the most part, it's all going into Eternal Flame. In a Mythic Plus setting, you will almost never be pressing Light of Dawn. So that's going to be one of your main, that's probably your main Holy Power spender right there is Eternal Flame, right? So as we build up our Holy Power again, just cast a few spells. I got 3 Holy Power. You can see that the Eternal Flame button, I can press it now, and that's what I spend my Holy Power on. Okay, so we've talked about these 3 spells here. Let's get a little bit more into the core rotation of Holy Paladin. I sort of have this single target macro that kind of helps me get through the loop of generating Holy Power, essentially. So it's on my 2 key here, and we'll go ahead and bring up the macro. I think I have it under... I have it as... Oh, here it is. I already clicked on it. Damage. This is a cast sequence macro. So that means it's going to cast these spells in this specific order. And after 3 seconds of not pressing the key that this is assigned to, the sequence will reset. Right? So if you press Judgment, Crusader Strike, Consecration, and then you wait for 3 seconds, the button itself will reset in the loop and it'll go back to Judgment first. So just take a quick look at what this looks like. So it's on my 2 key here, and I'm going to just press it. And you can see as I press the button, the spell sort of changes. So that was a Judgment into a Crusader Strike, into a Consecration, all 3 buttons into, I guess you could say, 1 button, right? It kind of helps with bloat on your action bars. And not only does it help with bloat, but it helps just streamline the process. You know, I press these buttons to do damage and generate Holy Power. It's kind of how I think about it in my head. Just to go a little bit deeper into this, I went ahead and pulled Crusader Strike over here on the right, just to show you guys that we're not accidentally wasting any cooldown on Crusader Strike. So watch the cooldown of Crusader Strike, then watch the cooldown of Judgment over here. So Judgment will Crusader Strike into a Consecration, and you can see that the Judgment cooldown is lower than the cooldown on Crusader Strike. So that means I will then go into another Judgment, then into another Crusader Strike, and the loop will just kind of continue. So I just wanted to clarify that just to show you guys that we're not actually missing out on any Crusader Strikes there. And I also just remembered I completely forgot to cover Crusader Strike. I don't know what I'm doing. Crusader Strike is going to be on a 7-second cooldown. It just does single target damage, and it generates a Holy Power. Now, the reason that this is really strong for us is obviously the Holy Power that it generates, but it also reduces the cooldown of our Holy Shock by 2 seconds. So if we remember from Holy Shock, it's one of the core spells that we use. You use it for healing, mostly more than damage. It generates a Holy Power, and it procs our Infusion of Light. So the more cooldown that we can get on Holy Shock, the more healing that we can do, essentially. So Crusader Strike, you could really say indirectly gives us a bunch of additional healing because it reduces the cooldown on our Holy Shock. So through the tooltip, you wouldn't really think, hey, this is a healing button, but it kind of is because it reduces the cooldown on Holy Shock, right? So this is one of the reasons you always want to be keeping this button on cooldown or the spell on cooldown as much as you can. Just always try to follow it up with your Judgment. And that's one of the cool things about this macro is it just kind of streamlines all that for you. You don't have to think about casting Crusader Strikes and Judgments and Consecrations. It's just all within that one button. So before we get to the cooldown section, I do want to include one more spell into sort of the core rotation of Holy Paladin. It's technically a cooldown, but I consider it more a core part of your kit. That's going to be a spell here called a Beacon of Virtue. This is going to be your main AoE. It's not a heal directly, but what it does is it puts a beacon on your allies within 30 yards, and then all allies affected by this beacon will be healed for 20% of the amount of your other healing done. So basically, you press this button, it puts a beacon on everybody, and any sort of single target healing that you do on somebody will be dispersed on the entire party at 20% effectiveness. So 2 things about this spell. It is on a 15-second cooldown. You will not be able to get 100% uptime on it. So it lasts for 8 seconds, and it's on a 15-second cooldown. So you get about 50% uptime on it. And then it's pretty expensive on mana. It's 125,000 mana. So between Beacon of Virtue and then between Holy Light, that's going to be your 2 main mana spenders, I guess. So you need to be a little bit mindful of those 2 spells. If you are running low on mana, it probably has something to do with you pressing one of these 2 spells too much. So yeah, just know if your group is taking a whole bunch of damage, everybody's at 50% health, just go ahead and press your Beacon of Virtue, and you can see it put a beacon over both of us, and then just start spamming some single target healing on yourself or whoever, and then that healing gets dispersed out. Okay, now let's go ahead and talk about cooldowns. So before we even get into our main cooldowns, I want to talk about a spell here called Awakening. And this is going to be a weak aura that we have. So I have to wait for combat. Okay, well, I was going to show you guys this weak aura, but apparently I'm in combat still. I can't get out of this combat bug. I just tried to relog and everything, and it's not going away. So a little bit of Blizzard spaghetti code. Not sure what's going on. But we will just go ahead and move on to the next part. Well, we'll go ahead. Let's just talk about this Awakening weak aura really quick. So we'll talk about the spell. I won't be able to go into the weak aura settings and show you guys exactly what it is, but here's the spell here, Awakening. So while in combat, your holy power spenders generate 1 stack of Awakening. 15 stacks of Awakening, your next judgment deals 40% increased damage, will critically strike, and it activates our Avenging Wrath for 12 seconds. So we haven't talked about what Avenging Wrath is yet, but just know when Avenging Wrath is basically your wing spell. It's your biggest cooldown in your kit. And when your wings are up, you're in sort of like an ascended form and you do a ton of healing. So this is something that is worth tracking because you can kind of control when this procs, and you can proc your wings at very key moments in the dungeon. So we have a weak aura to help us track this. I wish I could show it to you guys, but there will be a link in the description of the video. And you guys can go ahead and download it, move it around. It works right out the box, so you don't have to change any settings, anything like that. But let's go ahead and build up some holy power here and spend it. And you can see I get this stack over here. And you can see it's got 1 yellow bar of, I can't remember exactly, I think it's like 15. But once it gets to the very end, it will proc our Awakening. So each time we spend holy power, it doesn't matter if it's 3, 4, or 5, we will get an extra slot filled out on our bar. So let me go ahead and just fill this bar out really quick. We'll make a cut in the video here. This will take a little bit of time to fill out. Okay, and you see here that we're getting pretty close. There's only 1 more little bar left. And we filled out that bar, and it says Judgment triggers wings in 26 seconds. So our next Judgment will trigger our wings, our Awakening proc. We'll press it, and now we're in this huge sort of ascended form. So the whole purpose of that, again, is just to be able to track when those wings are proccing, and you know, you can kind of time it perfectly for certain encounters. Just kind of look at it, and as the bar is filling up, you notice that it's 3/4 of the way filled up. Just start thinking about how you're spending your holy power and when you want that to proc. Typically, you know, pair it up with either a boss or a hard trash pack. All right, wanted to quickly go over that. Let's go ahead and actually get into some of the cooldowns. So not going to go over everything. We'll just go over some of the main stuff. I'm not going to talk about like bop and sacrifice, all that. You guys can go in your spell book and look that up. But there is a lot of utility with Holy Paladin, but I'm just going to focus on the main core healing cooldowns. So first one I want to talk about here is Holy Prism. Now, Holy Prism takes us on this entire sort of sidebar here because that kind of gets us into our hero tree. But Holy Prism here on a 30-second cooldown fires a beam of light that scatters to strike a clump of targets. So if the beam is aimed at an enemy target, it deals holy damage and radiates healing to 5 allies. If the beam is aimed at a friendly target, it heals for 365 and radiates X amount of holy damage for 5 minutes within 30 yards. So normally I'm just casting this at an enemy, but the way this kind of works is if you want spot healing, you can cast it on an ally. If you want AoE pulsing healing, then just cast it on an enemy. In most cases, I'm just casting my Holy Prism on an enemy. So it's on a 30-second cooldown, and this is a pretty strong spell for us, especially considering the short cooldown, because not necessarily anything that we're reading here, but because it procs our Dawnlight. So what the heck is Dawnlight? We haven't even talked about it yet. This is going to be the top node of your Herald of the Sun tree, and just read it out here. Casting Holy Prism, which is the spell we just talked about, or Barrier of Faith, which is the second node here, so we're not running Barrier of Faith, causes your next 2 holy power spending abilities to apply a Dawnlight on your target, dealing X amount of radiant damage or X amount of healing over 8 seconds. So 8% of Dawnlight's damage and healing radiates to nearby allies or enemies reduced beyond 5 targets. So what this works is you cast Holy Prism, and then your next 2 holy power spending abilities will apply a Dawnlight. So typically what you want to do is Holy Prism, and then follow that up with 2 different like Eternal Flames, and get those Dawnlights on 2 different targets. So I wish that was it, but there's actually one more step to this little puzzle here, and we do have a divine favor. So we have Holy Prism, which procs Dawn Lights through our next 2 Holy Power spending abilities, and then Holy Prism also procs Divine Favor. So after casting Barrier of Faith or Holy Prism, the healing of your next Holy Light or Flashlight is increased by 40%. Its cast time reduced by 30%, and its mana cost reduced by 50%. So for this portion, I went ahead and built this out into a little macro here, and it's nothing crazy, but this might sort of help streamline the Divine Favor proc that we are getting. Let me just go ahead and show the macro. I had it up. I don't know why I canceled out. Here it is right here. So we can see cast sequence reset equals 20, a Holy Prism into a Holy Light. So that Holy Light will get the Divine Favor buff. And, you know, it's just a simple way to put it into one button. So to show you what that looks like, right? We'll just go on a target here. We will cast on the enemy. We'll Holy Prism onto him. And then we can Holy Light on ourselves. We see that we have Divine Favor, the buff here. So we'll just cast Holy Light on ourselves, and it uses the buff. Now you can take this macro and pair it with 2 Eternal Flames after it, because, right, we do have to spend 2 Holy Power spenders to apply those Dawn Lights. But I think you're going to be doing that pretty passively anyways. So I just kind of left it at this. So just kind of a little tip there. Now, since we're on the topic of Dawn Light, let's just go ahead and talk about Avenging Wrath now and how it works with these Dawn Lights. So we have Sun's avatar here. During Avenging Wrath, you become linked to your Dawn Lights. Now, the problem with this is if you don't have any Dawn Lights up, you're not linked to them. However, the second part of Sun's avatar solves this, because activating Avenging Wrath will apply 4 Dawn Lights onto nearby allies, and it will increase their duration by 20%. So what happens here is you become linked to all these Dawn Lights, and these sort of light rays come out, and allies who pass through those light rays become healed. It's very strong in a Mythic Plus setting, and then enemies running through the lights array will get damaged as well. So just show you what this looks like, we'll just pop it here, and you can see that we are linked to our Dawn Lights here, and enemies that run through and allies that run through are healed and damaged. So we talked about Avenging Wrath there and how it activates our Dawn Lights. Well, what the heck even is Avenging Wrath? We haven't talked about it yet. That's going to be this spell in our Holy Tree. On a 2-minute cooldown, call upon the light to become an avatar of retribution, increasing your damage and healing. Increasing your damage, healing, and critical strike chance by 15% for 20 seconds. So this is very core to us, right? Because we talked about how as we just go through our normal rotation, we spend Holy Power, we build up these awakening charges, and just kind of passively proc for us. And then we also talked about how this will also proc through our Sun's avatar, which will link us to our Dawn Lights to do a whole bunch of passive healing. And we also have a little bit more synergy here with Rising Sunlight. So after casting Avenging Wrath, your next 2 Holy Shocks cast 2 additional times for some burst healing. And then also after casting Divine Toll, your next 2 Holy Shocks cast an additional 2 times. So Avenging Wrath by itself isn't super strong, but what makes it so strong, I mean, it kind of is. I mean, it gives a ton of buffs there, but it becomes just absolutely insane because all the synergy with all these very core talents in our tree. So we can see in Rising Sunlight, after casting Divine Toll, your next 2 Holy Shocks cast 2 additional times. We haven't talked about Divine Toll. Let's go ahead and take a quick look at that. So Divine Toll here. Instantly cast Holy Shock on up to 5 targets within 30 yards. So this used to be a really strong spell in Dragonflight when we had like Glimmer and we were playing around consuming Glimmer stacks and reapplying them and getting a big hot effect out there, but it's not as strong anymore, but it's still not anything to laugh at. It's on a 45-second cooldown, and it's very simple, very straightforward. You just press the button and it casts a Holy Shock on up to 5 targets. So you press the button and it does a bunch of healing. Okay, I'm just going to talk about a couple more talents here, then we'll kind of get into the rotation, then wrap up the video. We also have our Lay on Hands. It's going to be a very strong cooldown. This will cause forbearance to a target. If you don't know what forbearance is, we have 4 or 5 different spells. I can't remember how many, but we have a few different spells that will put this debuff on the target. And if that debuff is on the target, then those specific spells can't be recast on the target. So if I were to Lay on Hands the tank and heal him up to full health, he will get forbearance for 30 seconds. And that means I can't use a spell like Blessing of Protection on the tank. Now, I'm not saying you'd ever do Blessing of Protection on the tank because it will drop aggro and you will wipe your group, but just as an example. So this is sort of your emergency button. It can get you out of a sticky situation with the tank or anybody for that matter. You can use it on yourself as well. So very core. And then we also have our Divine Shield. So this is going to be another emergency button that you have on a 3.5 minute cooldown. And this will make you the classic Paladin bubble. You press it and you're immune to all damage. This will also apply forbearance, so you can't bubble yourself and then lay on hands yourself. And then the final spell I'm going to talk about here is our Aura Mastery. So empowers your chosen aura for 8 seconds. And we're pretty much always going to be running our Devotion Aura. If you're not sure what that is, this is just basically a passive buff that we give out to our group. So this will reduce, basically you just press the button here. You see I got a little bar for it. You press it, reduces all damage taken for the entire party by 3%. So what Aura Mastery does is it will empower whichever aura you have selected. And if you're taking Devotion Aura, for example, the damage reduction is increased to 12% from 3%. So a very, very strong cooldown for us. This is one of those spells that gets stronger and stronger the higher keys you go, because it's based off a percentage. So the more damage that's coming out, the more damage it will prevent. So let's talk a little bit about priority. So the main thing you're going to be focused on, especially in a Mythic Plus setting, is your Beacon of Virtue and when to press it. So if there is AoE healing that is needed, you just press it, goes on a 15-second cooldown, and just go through your sort of normal healing rotation, and all those targets will get passively healed. You're going to make sure, you don't always want to keep this on cooldown because it does use a ton of mana, but this is very, very high in the priority list because this is where a bulk of your healing comes from. Next thing on your priority list, you're going to make sure you're not capping over 5 holy power. So once you sort of get up to that 4 and 5 range, you want to be looking to spend it. Then your next priority is going to be spending those Divine Favor procs. So we talked about after we cast our Holy Prism, we get this Divine Favor spell. And really, you can follow that up directly with a Holy Light, but really what you want to be doing is you want to be pairing that with an Infusion of Light proc. So really it looks something like this, where we have a Divine Favor, we have our Infusion of Light proc, and then that's when we'll be casting our Holy Light, so that can benefit from both of those. Then from here, we're going to make sure that we're casting our Holy Prism. You probably want to cast it on an enemy in most cases, but if you need a spot heal, you can cast that on an ally. Then after that, that's kind of when we get into the core rotation. So you want to focus first and foremost on your Holy Shocks. You want to make sure that you're getting that on cooldown. I use it for healing rather than damage. Just seems like once you get to sort of your limit in keys, you're trying to get out as much healing as you possibly can. You're not really focused on damage too much. You're trying to squeeze out every bit of healing you can to keep up with all the damage that's going out. So always spending Holy Shock on healing rather than damage. From here, you will want to Judgment, and then you will want to Crusader Strike to get that additional cooldown on your Holy Shock. Then from there, if you just saw in the third part of our rotation, we can drop a Consecration. You can kind of spot heal with Holy Lights, just kind of whatever needs to be done kind of as you see fit. You can cast Hammer of Wrath as those proc, and just some of your general maintenance things that you need to be doing. Oh, and I guess one more thing that I did leave out, I don't know, I just keep missing stuff here. We do have our Blessing of Winter here, so let's just talk about that. So that's going to be at the bottom of our tree here, called Blessing of Summer in our spec tree, but this rotates to different effects. It'll go to summer, spring, fall, winter, it'll just through the seasons. And the way this will work is you always want to be casting all of the blessings on yourself. You never want to cast a blessing on anyone else. Now, for the most part, you cast a blessing on yourself, you don't worry about the effects. Some do CDR, some do mana regen, but the one that you do have to kind of worry about is Blessing of Summer here. So if you can, and this isn't necessarily something that you have to do, but if you are going into a big pack and you know that there's going to be a bunch of healing and you do see that your Blessing of Summer is ready, go ahead and pair your Blessing of Summer with your wings, because what this does is it converts all that healing that you do into damage. So this little combo right here is where the bulk of Holy Paladin damage actually comes from, is by using that Blessing of Summer with your wings on a big pack. So any sort of fight where your HPS is going to be very high and you can convert that healing into damage. So the 4 blessings are Blessing of Spring, which is going to increase your healing and damage done. Blessings of Summer, which is the spell that we want to pair with our wings. Blessing of Autumn for that additional CDR. And then Blessing of Winter for the mana regen. And of course, we cannot end the video without saying thank you to our patrons. Guys, if you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. We'll see you on the next one.